Hi people. So this is a bit of a follow-up to my last video, and I'll be covering a few things here, so please bear with me. Some YouTubers get these sort of condensed 5-minute videos or something. I just feel that with the content I cover, it's not really possible to do that in the way that I want to cover my videos, my content. Um, I was away for quite a while, so like I mentioned in the last video, I just wasn't able to cover a lot of the things that were going on in the news, like the assassination attempt on Trump. So I'll be amalgamating that with the US political situation. There's been violent protests in Bangladesh, which just shows that bad as things are here, it's always worse somewhere else in the world. Um, that's over a government quota program, I believe, but over 90 people killed. So that, puts it in context. Um, the Paris Olympics, Team GB doing well as always. I'm going to make a specific video on the Olympics actually because I've been watching them closely. Um, um, Labour's first month in office, there's a lot of things to talk about. Firstly, on Sunderland, I think looking elsewhere, I don't think Sunderland had it worse, but nevertheless, we had serious disorder. We had looting, we had cars burned. Our local citizens' advice office was burned beside the police station. Um, it's just mindless yobbery because if someone's a victim of crime, they're now inconvenienced in terms of going to that police outlet. Um, but yesterday I took part in a walk. Now this was organised by local churches and mosques, a sort of ecumenical thing, and I'm pleased to say it got 200 to 300 people involved. I was talking to a guy from Tanzania, but there was all sorts of people involved in that. He was a doctor, um, all sorts of backgrounds. And granted, probably a lot of people from the traditional left, but you know, there was business people there. There was even some conservatives. It was just people coming out to say that this wasn't what they want to see in their city. And I think it was very important. Now, had that walk been organised by someone like Hope Not Hate or Unite Against Fascism or something like that, I probably wouldn't have went along because I don't entirely trust those groups. I think they're inconsistent in the perceived extremism that they're against. So I probably wouldn't have went along if they were involved. Also, they probably would have went to confront the nationalist groups. We had police liaison, but basically it started in Sunderland Minster, Sunderland's main church, went around the city centre, including some of the sites that were targeted, and ended up in the Sunderland Central Mosque. Um, they thanked us for their support because they actually needed police protection during the riot, which is a disgrace. You know, um, I won't say too much more about what happened in Sunderland, except I'm disgusted by it. Burning someone's car out, that may well be someone who needs their vehicle for work or for bringing a sick child to hospital. Who knows? A local taxi, citizens' advice. It's just brainless attacking those sort of things because that is not a statement against illegal migrants. Now, on GB News, there was one presenter saying that she didn't support the riots, but people are just fed up. They're just fed up, as if this is an excuse. Um, I get annoyed by that because it kind of does act as an excuse. It's like saying, well, if you're angry about a particular issue, it's fine to just go and set someone's car on fire. Or maybe it's not fine, but it explains it. You know what? I feel very angry about our justice system. I can get on my hobby horse with that. I feel very angry about it. I think my anger is justified. I think the legal establishment is arrogant, out of touch, undemocratic. I have a big problem with it. But my anger is against their arrogance. I'm not going to go and set someone's car on fire. That's just stupid, right? So I think there has to be an unequivocal condemnation when this stuff happens, and I think the police need to be supported. Now, there are legitimate complaints about two-tier policing, about the police lacking consistency. I do think the police are quicker to act against neo-nationalist types than they are against Islamists. That is a complaint about the police. I don't think it's a legitimate complaint. Um, but, you know, Reform, for example, was criticising Labour for being soft on crime. Now, unless they've updated it since I last checked, and I'm willing to be corrected here, maybe they have, But I have not seen Farage or Tice come out and condemn these riots and say that they're supporting the police and cracking down on the rioters. That would be a strong statement if the leader of a growing political party was to do that. So why is Farage not doing that? He's been accused of stoking up the riots. I don't really go along with that. I think rioters are entirely responsible for their own actions. But certainly, if he's been sharing false information, then he would be partly culpable. I've been seeing stuff online, like I say, that is clearly inciting rioting. And it's not explicitly saying go out and set a car on fire, but it's saying like the lion rises, meet here at this time. And it's just, there's a lot of code words going on. I mean, what the hell does that mean? The lion rises. It's clearly a code word for patriots to go out and, you know, I mean, you could prove that in a court of law, but you know, don't be naive. It just you just need to look a bit beneath the surface. On my other laptop here, I'm looking at disruption during the protests in Plymouth city centre. Again, this word protest, it's a riot. Um, It's the same sort of line that's used for eco zealots. As far as I'm concerned, the second someone starts engaging in vandalism, throwing things at the police, looting, but they don't deserve to be called a protester. I don't care what their cause is. I don't care if it's eco zealotry or anti immigration or pro Palestine or whatever. You cross a line, you don't deserve to be called a protester. Um, but I want to talk about disillusion in this country because there is a lot of anger out there, and it's true that this hasn't just come out of nothing. I think what happened in Southport is an excuse. There was trouble in Leeds before what happened in Southport, so there'll be other things going on. But I have long maintained that there is an establishment detachment. Now, when I talk about the establishment, it's more than one thing. You get the legal establishment, you get the government, you get senior police chiefs who seem to be out of touch. You get big media outlets like the BBC who seem to be out of touch. The Hugh Edwards case is an example of this. People will look at that and say, well, wait a second, he's your big anchor man, you're protecting him. Why? Um, Senior police chiefs, a lot of them do seem to be out of touch. Some of them are good, some of them understand there needs to be a back to basics policing, but for too long they've played politics. They've, been woke, they've been involved in politics, and that has shown in policing. I think people do feel angry when they see, on one hand, you get people shouting Allahu Akbar and the police do nothing. And then you get, the England or British flag comes out and they immediately make arrests. Now, I've no sympathy for far right yobs. I don't. And I don't buy this argument that I hear from some conservatives, oh, they're just innocent people. No, if you're getting blind drunk and you're waving an England flag and you're yelling obscenities at the police and hurling missiles, you're not innocent. You're a thug and I've no sympathy with you. I don't want you on my streets any more than you know Islamist agitators. Um, but anger at double standards isn't going to help. The police have to be more consistent than they have been. Um, there's anger out there, and on one hand, we had a decisive result in the election. Labour had a clear mandate, but there's still a lot of people who don't support Labour, and Starmer's talking tough on crime, but and I don't want to digress too much here, but he has a prisons minister who thinks, oh, too many people are punished. We're too addicted to punishment in this country. I'm talking about Mr. Timpson, the CEO of the Timpson Key Company in Manchester. He's from the peer. He's a peer, so he's not elected. He thinks too many people are punished. We're too addicted to punishment. Now, that is a double message. On one hand, Labour is trying to claim it's tough on crime. On the other hand, the prisons minister is soft on crime, quite clearly. Um, I'm not saying everything he proposes is wrong, but he's sending out the wrong narrative by claiming this country is too addicted to punishment. As many victims of crime would say, wait a second, it's the opposite. We see offenders offence after offence after offence after offence, and they get away with it. They don't go to prison. They get community sentences time and time again. It's all very well saying prison doesn't work, but is community sentencing working? If you have an offender who's sentenced that way, and they just go out and, the recidivism rate is very high with community sentencing. So I don't accept that the softly, softly approach, and I do consider that a soft approach, is workable either. But anyway, there's so many areas to do with crime that I won't get into all of it here. But this is just an example. Ordinary innocent members of the public, whether they are from the left or the right or the centre, feel disillusioned right now. I think there is a perception that I mean, the issue of immigration is a very, very important one. I took part in that walk, but I certainly wouldn't go along with some of the people who were on the walk who would be well on the left. And they would be of the school of thought, there should be no limits on immigration whatsoever. Now, I don't agree with that. I think it's foolish. And I think it's actually immoral because it puts pressure on everyone, including immigrants themselves. Um, but I am never going to go along with a mob who gather outside a hotel that's housing refugees, and they just want to lynch those people. I think that's uncivilized. I think it's completely obnoxious. Yes, there are people who shouldn't be in this country. Yes, there are legitimate contentions there, but I don't see anything defensible about attacking someone who could be, let's say, a young man from Eritrea who has escaped that country because the alternative is lifetime service under a brutal military dictatorship. So they go across the Sahara, they go across some dinghy across the Mediterranean, and yes, they may well settle in France or Germany, but regardless, they've come over the channel, they've risked their life to do so, they end up in a hotel, and then they get someone who wants to take their life outside after going through all of that. One problem I have with the far right, well, I have many problems with the far right, but they're utterly desensitized to empathy. They're just detached from what these people go through. Do they really think that people are going to risk their life to cross the channel because they just want free benefit money? I mean, get a grip. They're risking their life because they are desperate. And yes, there is an argument that they should settle in France. Um, but I do think there is a question there that there is, why would people do that? Why would they risk their life if they weren't desperate? I mean, so for me, it's, yeah, we need to have tough deterrence. Um, we need to have control on this. But I've heard far right activists basically advocate we just machine gun them down on the North Sea. That's the sort of mentality that's going on there. And I don't care what anyone says. Reform does have that mindset in its ranks. They may say that they kick out people who were members of the BNP and so on, but why is it reform attracts that contingent? They may be a minority, but I think they're a big minority. Um, there's many ordinary people who vote reform and their contentions, their views should be taken seriously. I think the left is wrong to just say everyone who votes reform is a racist. That's completely wrong. But I mean, I don't trust reform. I don't trust Farage because of his stance on Russia. I do not trust him on foreign policy. So, with all due respect to some of my subscribers, you say you disagree with me reform. Well, I'm telling you very clearly the reason I don't support reform is I do not trust reform on foreign policy. I think Farage would roll out the red carpet for Putin. I really do, given his statements recently. I do not trust reform on foreign policy. Um, but they've got some decent ideas when it comes to domestic policies. I think they do have some tough on crime positions, which I support. But they need to come out and condemn these riots unequivocally, and say these people are not acting in our name. These masked yobs, these neo nationalists, are not acting in our name. Farage needs to come out and say that. And if he fails to do so, the question is why not? Maybe he doesn't want to polarize some of his supporters. But this trouble spreading all over the country, and I think it's the worst since England riots of 2011. Um, and it's saddening to see. But coming out of it, firstly, in the immediate term, there has to be stiff sentences for people who are burning businesses and putting lives at risk. There needs to be stiff sentences. Labour has to prove it's tough on crime. That's the first thing. Secondly, all leaders of all political parties have to unequivocally condemn it. Farage has to do that, and if he fails to do so, the question is why. Thirdly, the police need support at the moment, but the police themselves do have to be far more consistent, and there does need to be pressure on them in that regard. I don't think they've been consistent. So police chiefs need to explain that. Why are they not consistent in rioting? Now, I support the police. I think it's a very, very difficult job that they have, and probably they'll always be criticised for something. But I do think that they've brought on some of their own problems. I think some of the corruption that's gone on in the police, some of the abuse of power, it hasn't helped matters at all. So police chiefs need to get rid of the rotten apples in their midst, and they need to enforce a culture of consistent policing. They need to also shake off politicized policing. I mean, pandering to woke causes, that just doesn't help anyone. I understand the need for, important community relations, but you can, for example, communicate with the black community without taking the knee. That's just unnecessary, and I think it's inappropriate. Um, but I joined the walk yesterday because I was disgusted by what happened in my city, and I believe I was attracted to the fact it wasn't political. It wasn't a protest. It wasn't hope not hate or something trying to make speeches about immigration. It was just a simple message of we're not going to tolerate a rioting and b intimidation of minorities. I will always be against thuggery. I'll always be against people being intimidated because they look different. And I'll also be against unsavory characters who do not belong in this country. So there's no inconsistency with that. I think the left is definitely naive with these things, but I do think there is an ugly, ugly component that are far right. I have conservative friends who frankly downplay this a bit. They say, oh, the far right doesn't really exist. I had someone earlier say to me, oh, the EDL disbanded in 2015. That's naive. They may be formally disbanded, but make no mistake, they're around. Tommy Robinson's as vocal as ever. Robinson's a glorified football hooligan. Whatever legitimate arguments he may have had, he is always associated with this violence. Always. I mean, where's Robinson coming out and condemning this? He isn't. So, it's just mindless fuggery. Anyway, I'm going to wrap this up, but going forward, establishments have to listen to people. There has to be a much clearer process for people to voice their opinions. I'm not saying that people have any right to engage in violence because they're angry, but this doesn't come out of nothing. And I do think there is a detachment between the legal establishment. I mean, the Court of Appeal, if you think a sentence is unduly lenient, try getting through to them. The frustrating thing here is victims of crime aren't going to go out and riot, but they just have to suffer. The disillusionment with that. But the sentencing council is out of touch, in my opinion. Um, I think the BBC's out of touch. I think there is an elitist arrogance there. The license fee issue is a disgrace. It is symbolic of that arrogance. Absolutely nobody should face criminal charges because they don't pay their license fee. That's a disgrace. I think BBC executives are overpaid. Um, the Hugh Edwards scandal opens up a question of are they protecting their own? Have they learned anything from Jimmy Savile? So there's those sort of questions that have to be asked. Establishments have to listen. Otherwise, the anger's directed towards them and they've no one to blame but themselves. Now, I'll always hold rioters responsible for their own actions, always. But establishments, whether it be the BBC or leading police forces or the criminal establishment, the criminal justice establishment of the government, or you name it, there has to also be a sense that those in power are not above justice. Look at the post office scandal. Now, you get leading figures in that, like Paula Venables. If they're found guilty of criminal misconduct, such as perverting the course of justice, she needs to face prison. There has to be a perception in our society that just because someone has a lord or lady before their name, or they have an OBE or whatever you have, that there cannot be a perception that they're above accountability. Accountability of power is paramount in a democracy, and I'm not convinced that it is fully applicable in this country. I think there's too many people in positions of power who are not accountable enough to the public. I'd also include big companies as part of the establishment. Big, powerful multinationals. They need to be accountable to the public. Um, Even this could expand in so many areas. You have these unscrupulous, for example, parking companies that fine people because they've been 10 minutes over the time, And people try to pay out and they can't even do that. There's no email address, there's no accountability. Thugs like that need to be targeted because they just abuse the public with their power. It disgusts me. It really, really disgusts me. I firmly believe in accountability of power in democracy is absolutely one of the most important things, easily in the top 3 to 5 most important things in a democracy, along with an open press and the rule of law and other areas. I'm going to wrap this up, but that's my conclusion. No excuse for robbery, but establishments have to listen. They have to listen.